The Galactic Council's grand chamber floated above the clouds of Virel Prime, its marble-white structure glimmering beneath the sun of a golden dawn. The air shimmered with calm perfection, until the silence broke. A single pulse of energy rippled across the Council's skylanes. Alarms whispered softly, not screaming, but warning in an almost respectful tone. Every delegate turned their gaze toward the central hollow ring as it flickered to life, projecting a live transmission from deep space. Sector 9 Earth's perimeter. Impossible, whispered High Chancellor Rinval, his silver eyes narrowed. That sector has been dormant for centuries. The transmission stabilized. At first, nothing but the void appeared, dark space, quiet stars. Then out of the black a shape emerged. It was not sleek or ornamental like the alien fleets of the Council. It was angular, scarred, and built for purpose, a vessel of human design, radiating power rather than beauty. The lettering along its hull read, UNS Retribution. Delegates murmured in disbelief. Humans? They were wiped out millennia ago, said Vornar of the Ark's Dominion, his tendrils flicking nervously. No, Rinval replied slowly. Apparently they were waiting. The Council chamber dimmed as the holographic display zoomed closer. The human warship wasn't alone. Behind it, the void shimmered as hundreds, no, thousands of similar ships decloaked one after another, like ghosts stepping out of history. Each carried the insignia of Earth, a fractured blue sphere encased in a white ring. The formation moved with precision, no wasted motion, no arrogance, only quiet purpose. A hushed awe spread across the chamber. The delegates had seen war before, but this was something colder. This was resolve. They shouldn't exist, whispered the Zintori delegate, his translucent wings trembling. We destroyed their homeworld, didn't we? Rinval didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer to the display, studying the human flagship's markings. The vessel looked ancient, yet its energy readings surpassed anything the Council possessed. They've rebuilt, he murmured. They've learned. The feed suddenly shifted to an interior transmission. A human bridge, bathed in sunlight, not darkness, appeared. The crew stood at attention, their faces calm and composed. Their uniforms were pale gray, edged in gold, marked with the sigil of the Terran Accord. At the center stood a tall figure, hands clasped behind his back, gaze steady. Transmission open, a crew member said softly. The commander's voice carried across the void. Calm, firm, human. To the Galactic Council. This is Admiral Kael Rendar of the Terran Fleet. You once decreed the extinction of our kind. You believed Earth was gone. He paused, the faintest glimmer of light reflecting in his eyes. You were wrong. The Council erupted into motion. Shouts, confusion, demands for security locks. But Rinval raised a hand. Let him speak. Admiral Kael continued, his tone steady but carrying quiet fire. For centuries, we rebuilt beneath your notice. You erased our name, our history, but not our will. Now we return, not for vengeance, but for balance. You call yourselves guardians of peace, yet your peace was built upon our ashes. The chamber fell into heavy silence. Even the air seemed to listen. Then, unexpectedly, Kael smiled faintly. We come in light, he said, but light burns brightest when shadow forgets it exists. The transmission cut. For a long moment, no one moved. Outside on Virel Prime's upper horizon, streaks of silver light began piercing through the atmosphere, massive vessels entering orbit. The Galactic Defense Array tried to scan them, but sensors failed. Every ship was broadcasting an ancient, long-forgotten human frequency, Solnet 01. They're not attacking, said Vornar hesitantly. They're just there. Which, replied Rinval, is far more terrifying. He turned toward the chamber's tall windows. Through them, one could see the glinting formation above the planet, arranged not in a formation of war but of message. The Terran ships had formed a single glowing pattern across the sky, a perfect circle of light, resembling Earth's symbol of unity. Below, billions of citizens looked up from their cities, whispering in fear and wonder. None had ever seen humans. Few believed they had ever existed. Prepare a diplomatic channel, Rinval said quietly. If they sought destruction, it would already have begun. The room shifted uneasily. Delegates argued, each voice layered with fear disguised as strategy. What if this is a threat display? What if they demand retribution? What if they don't want to negotiate? Rinval stared out at the sky. Then the galaxy will learn what true silence feels like. The doors slid open. A messenger drone hovered forward and projected new data. The Terran Fleet had deployed hundreds of orbital beacons around the Council's homeworld, each one transmitting a synchronized signal. When decoded, the signal formed a single phrase in standard galactic script: "We remember." Rendar exhaled, realization dawning in his eyes. This wasn't an invasion, it was a statement. "They've come to remind us," he murmured, "of what we tried to erase." Far above, the Retribution floated quietly in sunlight, its hull reflecting the gold of the morning star. On its bridge, Admiral Kael stood beside his communications officer, watching the transmission complete. "They'll panic," said the officer softly. "They'll think we're here for vengeance." Kael nodded. "Good. Fear makes them listen. But hope will make them remember." The officer looked uncertain. "And if they choose neither?" Kael's eyes turned to the horizon, where a blue shimmer, Earth symbol, flickered among the fleet. "Then humanity will show them what silence truly means." As the Galactic Council scrambled for answers, as beacons pulsed across worlds once thought secure, a new dawn spread over the galaxy. A dawn carrying not destruction, but the quiet strength of a species that refused to die. The era of human absence was over, and every star, for the first time in ages, began to listen again. The second transmission from the Terran Fleet did not come as words. It came as light. At local midday, Varel Prime's sky brightened to a soft pearly gold. The ring of human ships shifted as if a hand had turned a lens. Their beacons resynced and a new pattern swept across the atmosphere. Thin lines, gentle curves, delicate grids. It was not a threat display. It looked like a drawing made of sunlight. In the council chamber, the hollow ring captured the pattern and rendered it in the air. A lattice map of the sector, built from points of radiant white. Every world in council authority gleamed faintly. Every ruin lost to old campaigns flickered like distant embers. But in the center, where no mark had been for an age, a blue-white shape appeared, small, round, and whole. Earth. A delegate breathed. High Chancellor Rendar stood with his palms pressed to the rail. He had studied 1,000 star maps. None had shown Earth, this one did. Not as a warning, but as a reference point. The network of lines was not flight paths or weapon range. It was communication, SoulNet, Rendar whispered. "They're restoring an old backbone." Around him the chamber shifted in tone. Fear did not vanish. It receded under the weight of something heavier. Comprehension. If the Terrans had wanted to paralyze Varel Prime, they could have cut power. If they had wanted to declare conquest, they could have sealed the sky. Instead, they were illuminating routes, reconnecting old channels, showing the galaxy the shape it had forgotten. "Contrast their philosophy with ours," murmured Arch-Archivist Jever, his voice papery and thin. "We built barriers that looked like laws. They build bridges that look like light." Rendar turned to the side console. "Open a response band. Offer parley at ground level." "Ground?" Fornar's tendrils tightened. "That is irregular. We host orbitals for a reason." Rendar glanced toward the wide windows at the city below. White terraces stepped along green hills, solar spires catching the sun. "If they choose light, we must meet in daylight." Inside the UNS Retribution, the bridge lights were gentle and warm. Sunlight poured through a filtered canopy, painting the consoles with a quiet glow. Nothing was harsh. Nothing was hidden. Admiral Kael Rendar watched the Council's acceptance scroll across a display. His reflection overlapped the text, a steady face lined by time rather than bitterness. "We'll send a ground delegation," said Sarah Nix, Signals Chief, her tone calm. 2 envoys, 3 comms engineers, 1 medic, 1 observer. "No armor, daylight protocol." Kael nodded. "Make sure the observer is from the archive." Sarah blinked. "Ari Voss? He remembers what others do not," Kael said. On the lower deck, Ari Voss stood in a room that looked like a garden. There were living plants along the walls. Small pines, a swath of rivergrass, a lemon tree with pale blossoms. He held a thin tablet against his chest and watched a projection bloom in the air, an old image of Earth's oceans under winter sun. Waves broke in slow motion and the sound felt like a memory. He did not look like a soldier. He wore the light gray of the archive and the simple gold-lined emblem of the Terran Accord at his collar. His job was not to decide what happened next. His job was to remember why it had ever mattered. Sarah arrived with the formal notice. We go to ground. Council Plaza. Day cycle. Ari nodded. We bring proof, he said softly. Proof of what? Sarah asked. That we did not forget them even when they forgot us. The Council Plaza was a place of ceremony and open sky. Stone steps flowed down like water toward a bright fountain, and light fell across everything without shadow. Citizens came in careful clusters, silent but curious. Security formed a ring. Children, pushed forward by parents who wanted them to see history become present, peered over the railings with wide eyes. Rinval stood at the center with a neutral guard and distinctly unarmed attendants. His robes were white with a single band of blue that meant clarity. He felt the weight of the day rest on his shoulders like a question. From above, a human shuttle glided down. It did not roar, it hummed. The landing skids kissed stone. A ramp descended into sunlight. A small Terran team stepped into view. They wore the same pale gray the Council had seen on the bridge. Clean lines, nothing aggressive, a look that preferred function over parade. At the front walked a woman with auburn hair tied back in a practical band. She carried no weapon. She carried a translator node and the kind of gaze that listened first. Behind her came Ari Voss with the archive sigil, and further back 2 engineers wheeling a compact device that looked like a folded lantern. The woman bowed her head once. High Chancellor, members of the Council, I am Envoy Mireia Sol of the Terran Accord. Her voice rose clear in the open air. Thank you for choosing the light. Some in the crowd flinched at the human word thank. It sounded personal. It implied equality. Rinval inclined his head. We are here. He let the silence stretch one heartbeat longer. What do you want us to see? Mireia smiled, not in triumph, but in relief. She gestured to the engineers. They unfolded the device in smooth, practiced motions. Petals of transparent material rose and locked, forming a dome no taller than a person. Sunlight flowed through it like water through glass. Ari stepped forward and placed his tablet at the base. The dome woke. Light lifted into the air. Color without heat, motion without force, and formed a small sphere. Oceans swirled. Cloud bands drifted. Continents turned softly beneath a white arc. The children nearest the rail gasped. Even the security ring leaned in. Earth, Rinval whispered. He had never spoken the name aloud. Mireia's voice held steady. A memory, recorded when the seas were calm and the sky wore winter light. The sphere shifted. Cities appeared in daylight. People crossing open plazas, hands lifted against the sun. Laughter carried by wind, not by speakers. Long corridors with solar windows. School courtyards painted with stories. A garden on an orbital with a child running between lemon trees. Nothing of war. Everything of living. Faces, human faces. Not heroes, not statues. People. Rinval felt something old and half-remembered stir inside him. Like a whisper he had ignored because the words did not serve policy. Mireia continued. You will ask why we came back. You will ask why we did not speak earlier, why we did not break your laws with the sound of our return. She let the images speak over her, hands planting seedlings in bright soil, an elder teaching a child how to seal a window against a storm. We rebuilt. And as we built, we learned a truth. Strength without light is only shadow learning how to hold a shape. We waited for the sun to be above the horizon in us. The engineers dimmed the projection. The light sphere pulled back, resolved into the single phrase the beacons had carried. We remember. But now beneath it, another line appeared in the beautiful, simple strokes of the standard script. Do you? A murmur ran through the plaza like wind across tall grass. It was not outrage. It was not fear. It was something harder to describe. The first ripple of a shared mirror. Rinval cleared his throat. We remember laws. We remember stability. We remember the vow that ended wars among our member worlds. Ari Voss spoke then for the first time, his voice so gentle that everyone leaned forward to hear. Do you remember the worlds that paid for that stability without choosing it? Silence. Rinval did not avert his gaze. We remember that some choices were made in the dark. Then come into the day, Ari said, and he lifted a hand toward the dome. This device is not merely an archive projector. It is a synchronizer. It can unlock buried records if they were sealed to planetary daylight frequencies. He looked up at the sky. Some of your oldest decrees were hidden that way, written to be invisible at night. Jever, the archivist, started. That is true. In the Council's first century, A daylight cipher was used for oaths meant to be seen by all. His voice went thin. We lost it after the third consolidation. We told ourselves it was superstition. Mireya stepped back from the dome. Place your hands on the lattice, she said. Open what you locked. Let the light show you what you swore to keep. Rinval felt every eye in the plaza on him. He looked at the human team. He looked at the children at the railing. He looked at the sun riding high and without apology. He walked forward slowly and set his palms against the dome. It was warm like skin in noon air. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the plaza floor hummed. Soft, steady, like a note held in an old song. Around the fountain, tiny seams they had never noticed began to glow. Lines traced themselves in pale gold across stone, converging on the dome, and a buried script surfaced from the plaza's foundation like memory rising to meet the day. Jever gasped. Fornar took a step back. The citizens fell silent as the words became clear. Rinval read them, eyes moving in slow disbelief. He lifted his head to Mireya, voice unsteady. These are not our laws as we recite them. Mireya nodded, and there was no victory in her face, only gravity. They are the laws as your first council wrote them, before edits, before omissions, before Earth was removed from the map. The last line brightened as if the sun itself agreed. Rinval swallowed. He reached out to trace the sentence with his fingers, but the light would not let him touch it. He looked up, and for the first time since the human fleet had arrived, something like hope and dread shared the same space in his eyes. Admiral Kael Rendar requests an audience at the hour of high sun. Mireya said softly. He asks you to meet him where truths cannot hide. Rinval nodded once. Slowly. Above them, the ring of Terran ships adjusted by a fraction, and the sun climbed another step across the sky. A shadow, thin, precise, slid across the plaza, stopping at the edge of the fountain. The dome pulsed, and from the stone beneath their feet a second layer of script began to wake. The sunlight over Virel Prime grew sharper as the hour of high sun neared. The plaza still glowed faintly where the ancient script had awakened. Citizens stood in quiet clusters, afraid to leave, as if walking away would mean missing the next breath of history. Rinval stood at the fountain's edge, the reflections of the gold letters rippling over his face. He had not slept. Every attempt to analyze what the humans had shown led to more questions than answers. Why would Earth return only to remind them of forgotten oaths? What did they mean by balance? The voice of the Council's security chief cut through his thoughts. High Chancellor, the human flagship requests visual contact. They say the Admiral will speak at solar zenith. Rinval looked up. The sun was almost centered above the Council tower. Connect them, he said. A shimmer appeared in the air, clean without distortion. Admiral Kael Rendar stood on his bridge again, bright light flooding behind him. No weapons, no armies, only the quiet hum of engines and the reflection of the galaxy in his eyes. High Chancellor, Kael said evenly, your world's light has revealed something you buried. You have seen it, Rinval nodded slowly. Yes, we found the true foundation of our council. We found the words of those who came before us, including humans. Kael's expression softened, but his tone did not. Then you know what comes next. The Chancellor hesitated. Explain. Kael turned slightly, gesturing to someone off-screen. The image shifted, now showing a star map. Lines spread across the galaxy like veins of light, connecting hundreds of worlds. But some areas were dark, pulsing faintly red. These sectors, Kael said, once belonged to civilizations under the Council's protection. Yet they vanished from your records, not destroyed by war, erased by order. Rinval frowned. Impossible. Our archives show no such decree. Kael's eyes hardened. Because the archives you trust were rewritten to hide them. They were sealed under the same daylight cipher you just reawakened. The air in the chamber thickened. Rinval could hear murmurs rising from the Council's aides, the sound of fear struggling to stay quiet. Why reveal this now? He asked quietly. Kael's voice grew softer and more human. Because those sectors still exist, Chancellor. And they're dying. Your Council's silence left them to collapse without aid. Entire populations that once looked to you for unity have been waiting. For something, for someone. They think the galaxy has forgotten them. He leaned forward, and though his face was calm, his words struck like thunder. We are going to them. The room fell silent. Rinval's fingers tightened on the rail. Without authorization? Without negotiation? With warning, Kael said. This is your warning, Rinval. The Terran Fleet will cross Council boundaries at sunset. Not to conquer, but to restore what you abandoned. The Chancellor took a step closer to the projection. And if we forbid it? Kael met his gaze without anger. Then the galaxy will watch you try to forbid the return of light. The transmission faded. The council chamber plunged into silence, broken only by the hum of the holographic systems winding down. Vornar turned sharply. We cannot allow them free movement. If they rebuild old networks, they gain control of communications, trade, information, everything. Rinval remained quiet. He looked again toward the plaza below. The dome still pulsed faintly as if listening. Perhaps control is not what they seek, he murmured. Jever the archivist leaned on his staff. High Chancellor, the humans uncovered the daylight cipher. That means they have access to our deepest layers. If they awaken all of them, we may find truths none of us are ready for. Truth does not ask permission, Rinval said softly. Outside, sunlight shimmered across the city as a low vibration rolled through the air. The citizens lifted their heads. The human ships were moving, not toward the capital but outward, aligning into long vertical columns that pointed toward the edge of the system. Their formation glowed white gold like the start of a sunrise in space. Vornar's voice cracked. They're charging weapons. No, Rinval said, shaking his head. Not weapons, transmitters. Moments later, every comm link across the planet flickered to life. The same message appeared everywhere, in markets, in skyboards, in schools, on every display. The forgotten are waiting. Let them see the stars again. People stood frozen as the words scrolled in quiet rhythm. Then a new signal came from beyond orbit, clear, measured, human. To all worlds once bound by the Council's silence. This is the Terran Accord. You are not alone. The night is ending. The broadcast repeated once, then vanished. Inside the chamber, panic turned to chaos. Delegates demanded defense measures, emergency votes, sanctions. But Rinval did not move. He could still see Kael's calm face in his mind, the steady conviction of a people that had known extinction and still chosen light. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. They mean to expose everything, Jever nodded gravely. And when the light uncovers it all, Chancellor, what will remain of our authority? Rinval looked toward the dome below. Its faint pulse had grown brighter, almost heartbeat-like. Perhaps something better, he said. Then the floor beneath them trembled, softly, but enough to make the council guards tense. A young aide ran in, breathless. Sir! A new signature from the outer rim. Massive energy reading, unknown pattern. Rinval turned sharply. From where? The forgotten sectors, sir. Something is waking up. Every eye turned to the sky. High above, the Terran Fleet shimmered as if reacting to the signal. One by one, their ships began to tilt, aligning toward deep space. But this time, they weren't alone. From the darkness beyond the rim, faint golden lights began to appear, small vessels answering the same call. The humans had not only come back, they had awakened others. And as the Council realized that the night they once created was unraveling, Rinval whispered the words that chilled even himself. They didn't come to destroy us. They came to remind the galaxy what truth looks like. The sunlight flashed across the plaza. The dome flared once in blinding brilliance, then went dark. But far above, in the quiet between stars, the light of humanity spread wider than anyone had ever imagined. The council chamber was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the silence that comes before a storm people pretend not to see. Rinval watched the sunlight cut through the tall windows. The beam divided the floor into gold and shadow, as if the day itself wanted to remind them where they stood. They will cross our borders at sunset, he said softly. We have a few hours to decide what kind of galaxy greets them. Vornar slammed a fist on the table. We can't let them. If the Terrans move freely, every world will question our rule. You know what panic that will cause? Rinval's gaze stayed steady. And if they are right? Vornar's voice cracked. Then everything we built is a lie. Across the hall, Archivist Jever stepped forward, his old voice trembling. Perhaps it already was. The room fell still. The word betrayal hung unspoken in the air. Far above, on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Admiral Kael Rendar stood before a window that looked out over the white curve of Virel Prime. Behind him, The light from the star spilled across the deck, bright and warm, yet his expression was somber. Sarah Nix entered quietly. "Admiral, the Council's ships are repositioning. Not openly hostile, but defensive." "They're afraid," Kael said. "Fear is the first sign of change." She hesitated. "There's something else." Our deep signal array picked up a secondary frequency. "Someone from inside the Council is transmitting to us directly." Kael turned, his eyes narrowing. "Show me." A small holographic window opened beside him. The image flickered, then cleared into the tired face of High Chancellor Rin Val. "Admiral," Rin Val said, "I do not speak for the Council right now. I speak for myself." Kael's voice softened. "Then speak truth." Rin Val nodded. "You have woken old wounds. But there are things even you do not know. When humanity fell, the Council was not united. Some voted for extinction. Others tried to protect your world. The vote was falsified. The records you found, those were edited to hide it." Kael said nothing for a moment. The bridge crew glanced at one another, the weight of his silence louder than any alarm. "So it was not the galaxy," he said quietly. "It was a few hands behind closed doors." Rin Val's expression darkened. "And one of those hands still moves. Vornar leads a faction that will not allow this peace. He will strike before sunset. You must understand, if you answer with power, he will use it to justify everything he's ever feared about you." Kael's jaw tightened. "And if we do nothing, then he will make it look like you struck first." The transmission cut suddenly. The channel went dead. Sarah exhaled. "They're jamming. He's gone." Kael looked back at the window. Outside, the orbiting Council defense ring glimmered faintly. One sector of it had begun to rotate toward them, light concentrating along its edge. "It begins," he said quietly. On the surface, Vornar's voice echoed through the Council chamber. "Activate the array. If the Terrans approach our border, fire a warning flare. Show them we still control this sky." Jever stepped forward. "That's not a warning, Vornar. That's a provocation." "You call it what you want," Vornar snapped. "I call it survival." He motioned to his aides. "Prepare the pulse cannon." Rin Val caught his arm. "You'll start a war over fear." Vornar turned on him, eyes burning with the kind of conviction that breaks reason. "They're not saviors, Rin Val. They're ghosts with fire in their hands, and you're letting them haunt us." Rin Val didn't answer. He looked past Vornar to the open windows, to the citizens gathering again in the plaza below. They were watching the sky, not with hatred but with wonder. Humanity had become a mirror, and everyone saw something different in its reflection. At that same moment, in orbit, Sarah's console flared red. "Admiral, incoming energy spike from the planet's surface." Kael turned sharply. "Origin?" "The Council defense ring, it's locking onto us." Kael's eyes hardened. "Shields to half power, do not return fire." Sarah hesitated. "Sir, if they strike, then we show them restraint. The galaxy will know who chose the light." The first beam struck. It wasn't deadly, it was a test shot, a flare of controlled energy that flared white across the Retribution's hull. No damage, but the message was clear. Before the bridge crew could react, another transmission broke through the static. A shaky voice, terrified. "This is Council Engineer Lyra Den. Vornar's faction has taken control of the array. They're preparing a full discharge. It will overload the defense ring and burn through the upper atmosphere." Kael's face went cold. "How long?" "Minutes," she gasped. "You have to stop them." Kael turned to Sarah. "Send a signal, planetary override code, Solnet access level 3. Sarah's hands flew across the console. "That's ancient text, sir. They won't wait. Signal accepted." On the planet, every screen flickered again. Across Virel Prime, a single phrase appeared, calm and steady. "This is not the way of light." Citizens froze. Even soldiers paused as the words repeated, accompanied by the faint sound of a heartbeat, human and steady. The pulse of calm spread faster than any weapon could. Inside the chamber, Vornar shouted for control, but the operators hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to break that silence. Then, from the shadows near the console, Engineer Lyra stepped forward. Her uniform was torn, but her eyes were steady. "You won't destroy what we can still save," she said. She reached for the manual circuit and pulled it free. Sparks flew. The array went dark. Vornar turned, shock written across his face. You betrayed the Council." Lyra looked at him sadly. "No. I remembered it." The emergency lights flickered on. Outside, the sunlight poured through the windows, and in its reflection, the last remnants of the defense ring's glow faded away. High above, Kael watched the readings flatten. The attack had stopped. He closed his eyes for a moment, relief mixing with sorrow. "Someone down there made a choice," he said softly. Sarah nodded. "They disarmed it manually. One life for a planet." Kael's jaw tightened. "Then her sacrifice won't be in vain." He looked toward the blue horizon of the planet where the sun had begun to sink. "Prepare the fleet. We move at sunset." Sarah looked at him. "To strike?" Kael shook his head. "To reveal." On Varel Prime, Rin Val stood alone in the chamber as the day began to fade. The city outside glowed gold under the setting sun. He thought of Lyra, of her courage, of what Kael had said about light and shadow. The Terrans hadn't needed to fire a single shot. They had made the galaxy see itself. But in the silence that followed, Rinval could still feel it, the divide widening between those who wanted truth and those who feared it. As the last light touched the dome in the plaza below, he whispered to the empty air, "May the night come gently." And far above, in the twilight sky, the Terran fleet turned toward the stars, engines glowing like the beginning of a new dawn. The sun was setting on Varel Prime, but the light refused to fade quietly. Its golden rays stretched across the horizon, glinting off the Terran ships that hovered like patient stars above the world. Every soul below could see them, silent, steady, unflinching. Humanity had become a living reminder of everything the galaxy had tried to forget. High Chancellor Rin Val stood on the balcony of the Council Tower, the warm wind brushing against his robes. Below, the city hummed with uneasy whispers. Citizens looked to the sky with awe, some with fear and others with something the Council hadn't seen in generations: hope. Behind him, aides and guards rushed about, speaking in hurried tones. Reports flooded in from other worlds, transmissions, movements, uprisings. It had begun. "High Chancellor," said Jever, the frail archivist, stepping forward with trembling hands. "The colonies are rising. Systems long silent are responding to the Terran signal. They are rejecting Council authority." Rin Val's eyes stayed fixed on the light above. "Not rejecting, Jever. Remembering. They are remembering who they were before fear ruled them." Far above, aboard the UNS Retribution, Admiral Kael Rendar stood before his crew as they watched the same transmissions roll across their consoles. Dozens of alien worlds, once silenced, once erased, were lighting up across the galactic map. Ships of every kind, rusted, small, broken, were transmitting the same message in hundreds of tongues. "We stand with the light." A low murmur spread through the Terran bridge. Serenix's voice carried soft wonder. "They're rising, sir. Entire systems are declaring allegiance to the Accord. They call it the Dawn Uprising." Kael smiled faintly. "Not allegiance, alignment." He turned toward the large viewport where the stars seemed to flicker brighter than before. "They're choosing courage again." A younger officer, barely past 20, looked up. "But Admiral, the Council won't let this stand. Their fleets are huge. We can't fight them all." Kael's voice was calm. "We're not here to fight. We're here to remind them that the galaxy belongs to its people, not its fears." He pointed toward the central display, where a massive Council fleet was forming near the border sectors. "But if they force the issue, we show them what unity looks like." Back on Varel Prime, the Council chamber had become a storm of noise. Delegates shouted over one another, demanding security measures, sanctions, suppression orders. Vornar, bruised but still defiant, stood at the center. "This is rebellion," he roared. "We must crush it before it spreads further." Humanity's spark will burn every world it touches. Rinval rose from his seat. You cannot crush light, Vornar. The more you strike it, the more it spreads. Vornar sneered. Then you'll die clinging to a dream. He slammed his palm on the control pad. Outside, the Council defense fleets ignited their engines and began to move. The roar of thousands of ships ascending into the sky filled the air like thunder. Rinval looked out the window, his world's sky now streaked with contrails of both hope and fear. In orbit, the Terran Fleet didn't move. They simply waited. Kael's voice came through every ship clear and strong. This is Admiral Kael Rendar of the Terran Accord. To all vessels preparing for battle, stand down. We will not fire first. The choice belongs to the Council now. The words carried far beyond the human channels. The entire galaxy listened, but on the Council's command ship, Vornar's face twisted in rage. They think silence is strength. Then we will show them what power truly is. He turned to his gunnery officer. Fire on their flagship. The officer hesitated. Sir, there are civilians watching. Do it! The cannon roared. A blazing spear of energy shot across the void, straight toward the Retribution. Kael's crew braced, but instead of evading, the Admiral lifted a hand. Hold position. The blast struck the ship's outer field and spread like sunlight hitting glass. The energy scattered into a halo of white light around the Terran vessel. No explosion, no counterattack. Instead, the halo expanded, its glow reaching outward across the battlefield. Every Terran ship mirrored the effect, activating a shield lattice that connected them all in a single shining ring around Varel Prime. It was beautiful, silent, radiant and alive. Across the galaxy, transmissions of the site poured in. Billions watched as the Terran Fleet formed a luminous barrier, not of destruction, but of protection. On the bridge, Sirah's voice trembled. Sir, you redirected their attack into the shield network. Kael nodded. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, like fear into courage. Back on the Council world, Rinval watched in stunned silence. They turned our attack into light. Jever whispered, awe in his tone. The oldest Terran principle, convert harm into hope. It was their way of surviving extinction. Below, the people of Varel Prime erupted in cheers. For the first time in recorded history, the Council's citizens were not cheering for their rulers. They were cheering for humanity. Vornar shouted over the chaos, shut down the broadcast. Cut the feeds. But it was too late. The light filled the sky, spilling into every corner of the capital. Children reached toward it with open hands, smiling as if the sun itself had answered them. Rinval turned toward his old rival. You see it now, don't you? They don't want domination. They want remembrance, Vornar's anger cracked. For a moment, beneath the weight of the light, even he seemed small. If they're right, he whispered, then we were wrong for 1,000 years. Aboard the Retribution, Kael stood before the viewing glass as the Council's ships slowly powered down their weapons. They're hesitating, Sarah said. They're awakening, Kael replied. A message came through, encoded but clear. It was from Rinval. Admiral Rendar, you have the Council's attention. What do you intend now? Kael looked out at the sea of light that wrapped the planet. Not to rule, he said quietly. To rebuild the bridges your fears destroyed. He turned to his crew, voice rising now with quiet strength. Transmit the Accord to all worlds. Tell them we're not gods, we're not conquerors. We're human, and that means we keep moving forward together. On planets far from the Council's core, people began to rise, not with weapons, but with unity. Old banners of forgotten civilizations unfurled. Colonies reignited beacons that had been cold for centuries. The galaxy wasn't falling apart. It was waking up. In orbit, the Terran Fleet shimmered like a second dawn. Humanity's power was not in their ships or their weapons. It was in their choice to stand for something greater than fear. And as Admiral Kael watched the galaxy flicker back to life, his voice carried through every open frequency. The uprising isn't against you. It's against the silence that held us all captive. We remember, and now so do you. The words echoed across the stars, and for the first time in millennia, the galaxy didn't tremble under war. It breathed under hope. The uprising had begun. The galaxy had never been this bright. From the outer colonies to the core systems, thousands of worlds shimmered under the same broadcast, each receiving the same pulse of golden light emitted by the Terran Fleet. It was not a weapon, it was a signal. A mirror. Every ship station and city that received it began to display one message across their skies. Truth cannot be erased. In the council chamber on Varel Prime, Rinval stood before the massive window that opened to the heavens. The light reflected in his eyes as if the universe itself was watching. The chamber was filled with stunned silence. Delegates who had once shouted over one another now stood motionless, bathed in the glow of the Terran lattice orbiting above. Jever's trembling voice broke the quiet. "It's beautiful." Rinval nodded slowly. "It's what truth looks like when you've spent centuries hiding from it." A young aide ran in, breathless. "High Chancellor, the Terran flagship requests a live audience, open broadcast, every system, every species. They say it's the last transmission." Rinval drew in a deep breath. "Patch it through." A ripple of static crossed every screen in the galaxy. Then Admiral Kael Rendar appeared, standing tall, surrounded by soft white light pouring through his ship's observation deck. Behind him, the sun flared across the edge of Varel Prime like a living crown. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice steady, warm, deeply human. "You were told that Earth was gone, that humanity destroyed itself, that we were a danger to the stars." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every ear lean closer. "But the truth is simple. We never disappeared. We endured. In silence, in shadows, we learned. We watched as the Council turned fear into order and memory into law. We waited for the daylight could return. Across hundreds of worlds, millions stopped to listen. Workers put down tools, children stood on rooftops, elders looked to the skies with tears glinting like glass. Kyle's tone deepened. When our cities fell, we swore an oath, not of revenge but of return. Not to destroy but to remind. He stepped closer to the camera, his eyes calm, filled with something fierce yet kind. Humanity's strength was never in our weapons. It was in our will to keep going when all logic said stop. That is what you feared, and what you need most now. Inside the chamber, Rinval clenched his hands. He could feel the words shaking the foundation of the council itself. On another channel, Vornar's voice screamed from a secured bunker. "Cut the transmission! Shut it down before the worlds revolt!" But no one obeyed him. The technicians stood frozen, tears shining in their eyes as Kael continued to speak. "You silenced entire worlds to preserve your peace," Kael said. "You erased names, cultures, lives. You built an empire on the idea that silence meant safety. But peace built on silence is not peace, it's decay." The image shifted. Around Kael, holograms bloomed, ancient images of worlds once erased from maps. Verdant landscapes, lost colonies, forgotten species standing in daylight once again. "These are the voices you buried," Kael said softly. "And they are waking now, not because of us, but because truth can't die in the dark forever." In the council chamber, Rinval turned to Jever. "Bring the daylight cipher back to full resolution." The archivist's hands trembled as he tapped into the system. The chamber floor glowed once more, letters appearing in golden fire across the stone. The true founding oath of the council came alive again, word by word. "We are bound by light. We shall never rule by fear. Every world that breathes shall have its day in the sun." Gasps filled the room. Delegates fell to their knees. Some began to weep. The Council's greatest secret wasn't about power. It was about its promise. A promise long betrayed. Vornar's voice shouted again through the chamber's comm line. "Turn it off. Don't let them see this." Rinval stepped forward and pressed a button on the console. "It's time the galaxy did." He switched the chamber's main link to broadcast. The hidden oath of the Council spread across the skies of every world, written in brilliant light. On the Retribution, Kael watched as the Council's message merged with his own transmission. "They've done it," Sarah whispered. "They're showing the truth." Kael smiled faintly, eyes soft with pride. Then the reckoning is complete. Suddenly, a warning flashed on Sarah's console. Admiral! One of the Council's old defense cores is powering up. Autonomous control. Vornar's faction must have activated it remotely. Kael's expression hardened. Location? Deep orbit. It's targeting the Council capital. And us. Kael exhaled slowly. Prepare countermeasures, but keep power low. If we destroy it, the Council will see war. If we do nothing, millions could die. Sarah looked up at him. Then what do we do? Kael turned toward the light flooding through the window. We show them what mercy looks like. He opened a wide-channel transmission. To whoever still serves the old order, stand down. You are free. You don't have to obey fear anymore. The core's sensors flickered in the void. For a moment, the light around it pulsed erratically. Then, to everyone's shock, the weapon began to power down. Across the galaxy, cheers erupted. No one had fired. No one had died. Kael closed his eyes and whispered, "That's the difference between power and purpose." Back in the council hall, Rinval stepped out onto the balcony. The sun had set halfway, painting the sky in golden blue. He activated his personal comm link and spoke to the fleet above. "Admiral Rendar," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "The council stands down. The light is yours, and ours to share." Kael's voice came through, calm and bright. "Then let it never fade again." As the sun dipped fully behind the horizon, something extraordinary happened. Every Terran ship in orbit turned its reflective, plating toward the planet, redirecting starlight back down in waves. Virel Prime's night became as bright as day, cities glowing under the mirror light of humanity's fleet. Children danced in the plazas, elders raised their faces to the warmth. The galaxy, once divided by fear, stood together under one sky. On the bridge of the Retribution, Kael stood in the gentle hum of victory, not of conquest, but of peace earned through truth. Sarah whispered beside him, "Was this your plan all along?" Kael looked toward the glowing planet. "No," he said softly. "It was humanity's," she smiled faintly. "And what now?" Kael turned, his eyes reflecting the endless field of stars. "Now, we teach the galaxy how to live in the light." In the council plaza, Rinval stood alone as the last light faded from the mirrored sky. He whispered into the silence, not as a ruler, but as a man finally free of lies. "We remember." High above, the Terran Fleet drifted quietly, guardians not of power, but of promise. The reckoning was not destruction. It was awakening, and the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000 years, began its new day. The galaxy was quiet again, but it was not the same silence it once knew. It was softer now, filled with echoes of change. From the rim worlds to the council core, every planet that had once bowed to fear now stirred under a single truth. Humanity had returned, and with them came light. A month had passed since the reckoning. The Terran fleet still shimmered in orbit above Virel Prime, not as conquerors but as watchers, silent sentinels of the promise they'd reignited. The lattice shields that had once been a wall of defense now acted as beacons, spreading light to systems that hadn't seen a sunrise in generations. Below, the council city thrived under new daylight. Gardens replaced barricades. Children drew the Terran emblem beside their own flags. The word Accord had begun to mean something again, something more than law. Inside the council chamber, Rinval stood before a newly carved plaque embedded into the marble floor. It read simply, "Let no world be forgotten." He brushed his fingers over the engraving, his reflection flickering in the golden letters. Jever, the old archivist, stood beside him, smiling faintly. "A strange piece," he murmured. "Built not from force, but memory," Rinval nodded. "The best kind of peace. The kind you must keep remembering or it fades." He turned as a soft chime echoed through the chamber. A message from the Retribution. High above the planet, Admiral Kael Rendar stood at the observation window, watching the world below glow in the pale morning. His uniform was no longer sharp with formality. It looked lived in, softened by purpose. Sarah Nix joined him quietly, a small smile on her face. The Council's Reformation Charter is ratified, she said. All 12 sectors signed it. Even the ones that used to hide from each other. Kael nodded slowly. Good, it means they've started listening. Sarah's gaze drifted to the distant sun rising over the planet's curve. And what about us? She asked softly. Humanity came back and we changed everything. But where do we go now? Kael smiled faintly. Forward. He paused, his voice lowering with a quiet weight. You see, the fleet was never just ships, Sarah. It's an idea. A reflection of what we could be when we stop letting fear decide who we are. The galaxy doesn't need guardians now. It needs gardeners. She looked at him with understanding. You mean to leave? Kael didn't deny it. When the light holds without us, we go. That's the rule we made long ago. Later that day, the Terran envoy met with Rinval in the Council Plaza. The sun was warm, the air bright. Citizens gathered along the terraces to watch. Kael stood before the Chancellor, hands clasped behind his back. You no longer need our fleet here, he said. The Accord belongs to you now, all of you. Rinval's voice carried quiet emotion. If you go, who will keep the peace? Kael looked to the sky. You will, because now you remember what peace is. There was a stillness between them. The Chancellor extended his hand. Kael took it firmly, a gesture that once would have been unthinkable between human and council. The galaxy owes you its future, Rinval said. Kael smiled softly. Then don't waste it. The departure began at sunrise. Billions across the galaxy watched as the Terran Fleet lifted from orbit. No sound, no fire. Just soft light trailing behind them, fading upward like dawn rising into the stars. Children waved toward the sky. Entire cities stood in silence. Some cried. Others simply smiled, as if knowing they were watching history end the way it should, with hope instead of fear. Sarah Nix stood beside Kael on the bridge as the blue of Virel Prime grew smaller in the viewport. Will they ever see us again? She asked quietly. Kael's gaze lingered on the shrinking world. If they remember what we stood for, they won't need to. She nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. And if they forget? He turned to her, a faint smile returning. Then the echo will find them. Years passed. Virel Prime thrived. The galaxy rebuilt. Old rivalries softened under shared purpose. Statues were not raised for heroes. Gardens were planted instead, each carrying a small plaque engraved with the same words. We remember. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, strange things began to happen. In one sector, near the ruins of the old outer colonies, an old beacon flickered to life. A lone probe caught the signal. A faint heartbeat pattern. The same pulse the Terrans had used long ago. It repeated once every minute. Calm, steady, familiar. Back on Virel Prime, Rinval, now older, slower, walked through the plaza one golden evening. Children were playing near the fountain where humanity's dome had once stood. Their laughter filled the air like sunlight. He stopped as one of them pointed to the sky. Look, the boy shouted. A shimmer crossed the twilight, soft and white like a ripple through the stars. It wasn't a ship, not exactly. More like a trail of light weaving across the heavens before fading into the night. Jever, now retired but still curious, stepped up beside Rinval. You see it too? Rinval smiled faintly. Yes, and I think I understand now. He looked at the children, their faces glowing in wonder. That's not them returning. That's their message echoing through the stars, reminding us what we promised to keep. The old archivist chuckled softly. So the humans left an echo that never fades. Rinval nodded. They left themselves in the light. Far away, deep beyond the mapped regions of the galaxy, a hidden Terran ship drifted through starlight. Inside, a new generation of humans watched the transmissions from afar. The galaxy they had changed, continuing to grow. To learn, to live, Kael Rendar stood at the window. Older now, his uniform faded from years of quiet travel. Sarah stood beside him. Do you think they'll ever truly understand what we did? She asked. Kael smiled faintly, watching a distant star flicker. One day, someone will look up at the light and feel what we felt. That spark that says we can be more. That's enough. He turned away from the glass, his voice calm and certain. The galaxy doesn't need us to lead anymore. It just needs to remember that light always finds a way home. The retribution slowly faded into the horizon, its hull glowing with the reflection of a nearby star. No grand farewell, no war, no monument, only quiet light, and the hum of a legacy still moving forward. On Varel Prime, as the twin suns rose days later, the morning light struck the Council's marble steps. Etched there, beneath centuries of dust and memory, were the words humanity had given them before leaving. We come in light. And as the day spread across the planet, that light touched every world, every ocean, every hand that reached upward. The echo lived on, soft, endless, and human.